The wind howled through the narrow streets of the small coastal town, carrying the faint scent of salt and betrayal. Eleanor stood at the edge of the cliff, her dark hair whipping wildly around her face, her hands trembling as she clutched the crumpled letter. The ink had smeared from her tears, but the words were seared into her mind. "I'm sorry, Ellie. It's over. I've been with her for months." Below her, the waves crashed against the jagged rocks, their roar drowning out the scream she wanted to let loose into the night. She had loved him, God, how she had loved him. And now, every memory of James felt like a shard of glass twisting deeper into her chest. They had met 3 years ago, on a rainy afternoon in a cramped bookstore. She'd been searching for a poetry collection, and he'd reached over her shoulder to pull it from the shelf, his warm voice teasing, "You look like someone who'd rather read about love than live it." She'd laughed, blushing, and that was it, the spark that lit the fire. James was charming, with hazel eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a laugh that could melt the iciest of days. He was a fisherman, weathered by the sea but softened by the stories he told her late at night, his head resting on her lap as she ran her fingers through his salt-streaked hair. Their love had been a quiet thing at first, built on stolen glances and whispered promises. He'd take her out on his boat, the Silver Gull, and they'd drift under the stars, the world shrinking to just the two of them. "You're my anchor, Ellie," he'd say, pressing his forehead to hers. "No matter how rough the seas get, you keep me steady." She believed him. She believed every word, every touch, every vow they made in the dark. But the cracks started small. A missed call here, a late night there. He'd come home smelling faintly of perfume not hers and she'd brush it off, telling herself it was the sea playing tricks on her senses. She didn't want to see it. She couldn't bear to. Eleanor had always been the kind of woman who trusted too deeply, who gave her heart without holding back, even when the world had taught her better. It was 6 months ago when the rumors began. The town was small, and gossip spread like wildfire. "James was seen with that girl from the tavern," whispered Mrs. Harrow at the market, her voice dripping with pity. "The redhead Clara. Pretty little thing, but trouble." Eleanor had smiled tightly, clutching her basket of apples, and said, "People talk. It doesn't mean anything." But the seed was planted, and it grew, twisting its roots into her thoughts until she couldn't sleep without imagining his hands on someone else. She confronted him once, 3 months ago, her voice shaking as she stood in their tiny kitchen. "Are you seeing her, James? Tell me the truth." He'd looked at her with those hazel eyes, so steady, so sure, and said, "Ellie, I'd never hurt you. You're everything to me." And she'd believed him again, because love makes fools of us all. The letter came yesterday. She'd found it slipped under the door, no envelope, just a folded piece of paper in his messy scrawl. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but it was enough to shatter her world. "I'm sorry, Ellie. It's over. I've been with her for months. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I can't keep lying. Clara's pregnant. I'm leaving with her tomorrow. Pregnant." The word hit her like a punch, stealing her breath. She'd stumbled to the cliff then, the letter still in her hand, and now here she was, staring into the abyss. The cruelty of it wasn't just the betrayal, it was the timing. Tomorrow was their anniversary. 3 years since that rainy day in the bookstore. He'd promised her a surprise, something special, and she'd spent weeks dreaming of a ring, a proposal, a future. Instead, he'd given her this. Eleanor's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, the cold earth biting into her skin. She could still hear his voice, feel his arms around her, taste the salt of his kiss. How could it all mean nothing? How could he build her a world, and then burn it down without a backward glance? But the night wasn't done with her yet. As she sat there, broken and lost, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Clara, red hair glowing like a flame in the moonlight, her swollen belly unmistakable even under her coat. Eleanor's heart stopped. She hadn't expected this, hadn't braced herself for the sight of the woman who'd stolen everything. "I didn't mean to find you here," Clara said, her voice soft but steady. I needed air. I saw you leave the house." Eleanor stared at her, rage and grief warring in her chest. "You've got some nerve," she spat, her voice raw. "Coming here, after what you've done." Clara flinched but didn't look away. "I'm not proud of it. I didn't plan this, none of it. James and I. It just happened. It just happened." Eleanor laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You ruined my life because it just happened." "I know you hate me," Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself. "You have every right to. But I'm not here to fight. I'm here because I'm scared. He's leaving tomorrow, but not with me. He told me this morning he's going alone." He doesn't want the baby. He doesn't want either of us." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Eleanor blinked, trying to process them. "What?" "He's a coward," Clara said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He lied to me, just like he lied to you. I thought he loved me, but he doesn't. He's running from us both." Eleanor's mind reeled. James wasn't just leaving her, he was abandoning Clara too, and the child she carried. The man she'd loved, the man she'd trusted, was a stranger. A monster. For a moment, the two women stood in silence, the wind whipping around them, the sea roaring below. Then Clara stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Eleanor, but I'm alone now, and I don't know what to do." Eleanor looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes, and felt something shift. The anger was still there, burning hot, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, pity, maybe, or the ghost of understanding. They were both victims of the same man, bound by the wreckage he'd left behind. The night stretched on, dark and unforgiving, and as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Eleanor made a choice. She wouldn't let James destroy her. Not completely. But what came next? Revenge, redemption, or something else entirely she didn't yet know. The dawn broke over the cliffs, a cold, gray light spilling across the sea. Eleanor stood, brushing the dirt from her knees, her eyes fixed on Clara. The other woman's tears had dried, leaving streaks on her pale face, and her hands rested protectively over her swollen belly. For a moment, Eleanor felt a pang of something, sympathy, perhaps, but it was quickly swallowed by the fire raging inside her. James had betrayed them both, yes, but Clara had been complicit. She'd made her choices. And now, Eleanor would make hers. "He's leaving today," Eleanor said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the wind. "You said he's going alone." Clara nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "He told me last night. Packed a bag and said he's taking the Silver Gull out at noon. He's done with this town with us." The Silver Gull. His pride and joy, the boat where he'd whispered promises to her under the stars. The thought of him sailing away on it, free of consequences, while she and Clara drowned in the wreckage of his lies, made Eleanor's stomach twist. No, he wouldn't get that ending. Not if she had anything to say about it. "Then we don't have much time," Eleanor said, turning toward the path that led back to town. Her mind was racing, pieces of a plan snapping into place like the jagged rocks below. Clara hesitated, her brows furrowing. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor stopped, glancing over her shoulder. "I'm going to make sure he pays. You can come with me, or you can stay here and cry about it. Your choice." Clara's lips parted, surprise flickering in her eyes, but then her jaw tightened. She nodded once, sharply, and followed. Whatever had happened between them, whatever resentment lingered, it was dwarfed by the shared wound James had inflicted. For now, that was enough. The town was waking up as they descended the cliff path, the fishermen hauling their nets, the shopkeepers unlocking their doors. Eleanor's cottage sat on the edge of the harbor, a squat little house with peeling paint and a view of the docks. She pushed the door open, ignoring the creak of the hinges, and went straight to the kitchen. Clara lingered in the doorway, uncertain, as Eleanor rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a knife, a small, sharp blade James had once used to gut fish. Clara's eyes widened. "Eleanor, what? Not for you," Eleanor snapped, tucking the knife into her coat pocket. "And not for him, not like that. I'm not a murderer." But he's not walking away unscathed. She moved to the fireplace next, grabbing a tin box from the mantel. Inside was a stack of letters, every note James had ever written her, every scrap of affection she'd clung to like a lifeline. She shoved them into a burlap sack, then grabbed a bottle of kerosene from under the sink. Clara watched in silence, her breathing shallow, as Eleanor's movements grew more frantic, more purposeful. "You're going to burn something?" Clara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor didn't answer. She slung the sack over her shoulder and headed for the door. "Come on. We need to get to the docks before he does." The harbor was bustling by the time they arrived, the air thick with the smell of fish and diesel. The Silver Gull bobbed gently at its mooring, its white hull glinting in the weak morning sun. James wasn't there yet. Eleanor could see that from a distance, but his bag was already on deck, a battered duffel she recognized from their trips together. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to keep moving. She climbed aboard, the boat rocking slightly under her weight, and Clara followed, her steps unsteady. "What's the plan?" Clara asked, glancing nervously toward the shore. Eleanor dropped the sack and pulled out the letters, scattering them across the deck. He loved this boat more than anything, more than me, more than you, more than that child you're carrying. So we take it from him. We make him feel what it's like to lose everything." Clara's eyes darted to the kerosene bottle in Eleanor's hand. "You're going to sink it?" "No," Eleanor said, her voice hard. "I'm going to burn it. Right here, where he can see it. Where the whole town can see it." Clara swallowed, her hands trembling, but she didn't protest. Maybe she understood. Maybe she felt the same hunger for retribution gnawing at her insides. Eleanor didn't care either way. She was past asking for permission. She uncapped the kerosene, splashing it over the letters, the deck, the ropes coiled near the helm. The sharp smell stung her nose, but it fueled her resolve. She struck a match, the tiny flame flickering in her fingers, and for a moment, she hesitated. This was James's heart, his soul, the thing that had defined him. Destroying it would destroy a part of him too. But then she remembered the letter, the words "Clara's pregnant," and the match fell. The fire caught quickly, licking at the papers and spreading to the wood. Eleanor stepped back, watching as the flames grew, their heat warming her face. Clara grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the edge of the boat. "We need to get off now." They scrambled onto the dock just as the fire roared to life, a hungry, living thing consuming the Silver Gull. Smoke billowed into the sky, black and thick, drawing shouts from the fishermen nearby. People were running toward the water now, buckets in hand, but Eleanor didn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on the burning boat. And then she saw him. James emerged from the crowd, his face pale, his hazel eyes wide with disbelief. He dropped the second bag he'd been carrying and sprinted toward the dock, shoving people aside. "Ellie!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "What the hell are you doing?" She turned to face him, the knife cold against her palm inside her pocket. "What I should have done months ago," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You don't get to leave like nothing happened, James. You don't get to walk away clean." He stared at her, then at the fire, his hands clenching into fists. "You're insane. That's my life burning up there. And this was mine," she screamed, stepping closer, her grief and rage spilling out in a torrent. "You took everything from me, my trust, my future, my heart, and you gave it to her." She gestured at Clara, who stood a few feet away, her face ashen. "And then you threw her away too. You're a coward, James. A liar. And now you've got nothing." The flames roared higher, the heat forcing the crowd back. James lunged toward the boat, as if he could somehow save it, but the fire was too fierce, too far gone. He stumbled, falling to his knees on the dock, his hands clawing at the wood. "Ellie, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to save it." She cut him off, pulling the knife from her pocket. She didn't raise it, didn't threaten him, just held it where he could see it, a promise of what she could do. "You're not worth the blood on my hands. But you'll live with this. Every day, you'll see this fire in your head, and you'll know it's because of what you did." James stared at her, tears streaming down his face, but she felt no pity, only cold, hard satisfaction. The Silver Gull was gone, reduced to a skeleton of charred wood and ash, and with it went the last piece of the man she'd loved. Clara stepped forward then, her voice quiet but firm. "We're done with you, James. Both of us." He looked between them, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. The crowd murmured, their eyes darting from the burning wreck to the three figures on the dock. Eleanor turned away, the knife slipping back into her pocket, and walked toward the shore. Clara followed, her steps slow but resolute. The fire burned itself out as the sun climbed higher, leaving a smoking ruin in its wake. James stayed on his knees, a broken man with nothing left to run to. And Eleanor, for the first time in months, felt the weight begin to lift, not all of it, not yet, but enough to breathe. But this was only the beginning of her revenge. The smell of smoke clung to Eleanor's clothes as she walked away from the docks, the echoes of James's broken pleas fading behind her. Clara kept pace, her breathing uneven, but Eleanor barely noticed her. Her mind was already spinning, weaving a web of retribution far darker than the flames that had devoured the Silver Gull. Burning his boat had been a start, a visceral, satisfying strike, but it wasn't enough. She wanted him to suffer, not just for a day or a week, but for the rest of his miserable life. She wanted to carve her pain into his soul, to make him feel the emptiness he'd left in her, magnified 1,000 times. They reached her cottage, and Eleanor pushed the door open with more force than necessary, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with memories she could no longer bear. She dropped the burlap sack now empty of letters onto the floor and turned to Clara, who hovered near the threshold like a ghost. "You're still here," Eleanor said, her tone flat but edged with something dangerous. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her hands resting on her belly. I don't know where else to go. He's gone, Eleanor. He's got nothing left to give me, and I've got nothing left to lose." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Clara was a tool now, whether she knew it or not, a pawn in the game Eleanor was about to play. "Fine," she said finally. "You can stay. But you're going to help me." "Help you?" Clara's voice wavered. "With what?" "With him," Eleanor replied, her lips curling into a faint, cold smile. "We're not done with James." "Not by a long shot." Clara frowned, but before she could ask more, Eleanor moved to the small desk in the corner. She pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen, her movements deliberate, almost mechanical. The idea had come to her on the walk back, sharp and cruel, like a blade sliding into place. James had always cared about what people thought of him, his reputation as the charming fisherman, the good man with a quick smile. It was a mask he'd worn so well, even she hadn't seen through it until it was too late. Now, she'd rip it off and let the town see the monster underneath. She began to write, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. "To the people of Harrow's Bay, you know James Carter as a friend, a neighbor, a man of the sea. But I know him as a liar, a cheat, and a coward. For 3 years, he promised me a life, a future, while he slipped away to warm another woman's bed. Clara Hayes carries his child, a child he's abandoned, just as he abandoned me. He's leaving today, running from the mess he's made, but don't let him fool you. He's not a man. He's a snake, slithering away from the consequences of his own venom. Ask him about the nights he spent with her while I waited at home. Ask him about the promises he broke. Ask him why his boat burned today. It was the least he deserved." She signed it with a flourish, Eleanor Mayhew, and handed it to Clara. "Read it." Clara's eyes scanned the page, her face paling with every word. "You're going to show this to everyone." "Not just show it," Eleanor said, standing. "I'm going to nail it to every door in town. The tavern, the market, the church, everywhere he's ever been. By tonight, there won't be a soul in Harrow's Bay who doesn't know what he is." Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the paper. This will ruin him." "Good," Eleanor snapped, snatching the letter back. "He ruined us first." She didn't wait for Clara's response. She grabbed a hammer and a handful of nails from a toolbox by the door and stormed out, the letter clutched in her hand. The town was still buzzing from the fire. People gathered in knots, whispering about the Silver Gull. Eleanor moved through them like a shadow, her face a mask of determination. She started at the tavern, the place where James had met Clara, where he'd laughed and drank while she sat at home stitching his torn shirts. She slammed the letter against the door and drove a nail through it, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. Heads turned, eyes widened, but she didn't stop. She moved to the market next, then the post office, then the church, each nail a strike against the man who'd broken her. By noon, the town was alive with the scandal. People clustered around the letters, reading aloud in hushed, shocked tones. Eleanor stood back, watching from a distance as the whispers grew into a roar. She saw Mrs. Harrow, the old gossip, shaking her head in disgust. She saw Tom, James's fishing partner, rip a letter down and crumple it in his fist, his face red with anger, not at her, but at James. The tide was turning, and she felt it, a dark thrill pulsing through her veins. But the real blow came when James appeared. He stumbled into the square, his clothes rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He'd clearly been drinking, drowning his sorrows after the fire, but now he was sober enough to see the damage. He froze, staring at the crowd, at the letters flapping in the breeze. What is this?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. No one answered at first. Then Tom stepped forward, his broad shoulders tense. "It's the truth, Carter. You've been lying to all of us." James's gaze darted to Eleanor, standing at the edge of the square, her arms crossed. "Ellie," he said, taking a step toward her, "you didn't have to do this. We could have talked. She cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice through stone. "Like you talked to me when you were sneaking off with her. Like you talked to Clara when you told her you'd stay." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to talk your way out of this, James. Everyone knows now. Everyone sees you." He flinched, his hands trembling. The crowd pressed in, their stares heavy with judgment. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but it was weak, pathetic, lost in the murmur of voices around him. "Sorry doesn't fix it," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a chilling calm. "You're nothing here anymore. No boat, no friends, no name. You'll leave this town, but you'll carry this with you every look, every whisper, every door that slams in your face. That's my gift to you." James sank to his knees, his head in his hands, as the crowd closed around him, their voices rising in a chorus of condemnation. Eleanor turned away, her heart pounding, but it wasn't over. She had one more move, one more twist of the knife. That night, she found Clara in the cottage, sitting by the window, staring out at the darkened sea. "He's gone," Clara said quietly. "I saw him leave. Took a bus out of town, didn't even look back." Eleanor nodded, setting a small wooden box on the table. "Good. But we're not finished." Clara frowned. "What's that?" Eleanor opened the box, revealing a stack of photographs, pictures of her and James, smiling, laughing, kissing. Moments she'd cherished, now weapons in her hands. "I'm sending these to every port town up the coast," she said, "with a note. His face, his name, his story. Wherever he goes, this will follow him. He'll never outrun it." Clara stared at her, a mix of awe and fear in her eyes. "You're relentless." "He made me this way," Eleanor replied, her voice cold as the wind outside. "He thought he could break me and walk away. He was wrong." She sealed the first envelope, her fingers steady, her mind clear. James would live, yes, but he'd live in a prison of her making, haunted by the past he couldn't escape. And that, she decided, was a fate worse than death. The cottage was silent save for the faint scratch of Eleanor's pen against paper. The photographs lay scattered across the table, a gallery of lies frozen in time. James's arm around her waist, his grin wide and carefree, her eyes bright with trust. She'd already sealed a dozen envelopes, each addressed to a different coastal town, each containing a picture and a note detailing his betrayal. But as the night deepened, a new idea took root, one so cruel, so precise, it made her pause. His family. James had always spoken of them with a quiet reverence of his mother, Margaret, a stern widow who'd raised him alone after his father drowned at sea, his younger sister, Lily, a soft-spoken girl who idolized her big brother. They lived in our inland, in a small farming village called Dunmere, far enough from Harrow's Bay that the gossip might not have reached them yet. But Eleanor would make sure it did. She'd twist the knife deeper, using the people he loved most to tighten the noose around his neck. Clara watched from the corner, her hands folded over her belly, her expression uneasy. "You're writing more letters?" she asked, breaking the stillness. "Not to the ports this time," Eleanor said, her voice low and focused. She dipped the pen in ink and began anew, the words flowing like venom. "Dear Mrs. Carter, you don't know me, but I know your son. My name is Eleanor Mayhew, and for 3 years, I loved James with everything I had. I thought he was a good man, your good man. But he's not. He betrayed me, lied to me, and left me for another woman, Clara Hayes, who's carrying his child. He abandoned her too, ran from his own blood. I burned his boat, yes, but only because he burned my life first. He's on his way out of Harrow's Bay now, a coward with nothing to his name. I thought you should know the truth about the son you raised. I'm sorry to bring you this pain, but he brought it on himself." She paused, then added a final line, her hand trembling with cold satisfaction. "Ask Lily what she thinks of her hero now." Eleanor folded the letter and slid it into an envelope, addressing it to Margaret Carter in Dunmere. She wrote a second one, shorter but no less sharp, for Lily. "Lily, your brother's not the man you think he is. He broke my heart and left a woman pregnant, then ran away. I hope you never trust him again." Clara shifted, her chair creaking. "You're sending those to his mother and sister?" "Yes," Eleanor said, sealing the envelopes. "He always said they were his rock, the only people who'd never turn on him. Let's see how he feels when they do." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She looked down, her fingers tightening on her skirt. Eleanor didn't care if she approved. This wasn't about Clara anymore. This was about James, about stripping away every last refuge until he had nowhere left to hide. The next morning, Eleanor walked to the post office, the envelopes tucked under her arm. The town was still buzzing with the fallout from yesterday. People avoided her gaze, their whispers trailing behind her like shadows. She didn't mind. Let them talk. Let them fear her. She mailed the letters with a calm nod to the clerk, then returned home to wait. The seeds were planted, now she'd watch them grow. It took 3 days for the first sign. A letter arrived, addressed to Eleanor in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. She tore it open, her pulse quickening as she read, "Miss Mayhew, I received your letter. I don't know what to say. James was my pride, my boy. If what you say is true, and I pray it isn't, I don't know him anymore. He came here yesterday, looking for a place to stay, but I couldn't look at him the same. Lily won't speak to him. She cried all night after reading your words. I don't know what he's done to you, but you've broken us too. Please, leave us be now." Margaret Carter Eleanor set the letter down, a slow smile spreading across her face. It had worked. Margaret's faith in her son was shattered, and Lily Sweet, adoring Lily, had turned her back. She could picture James standing in his mother's kitchen, his pleas falling on deaf ears, the weight of their rejection crushing him. Good. Let him feel it. But she wasn't done. The next step came that evening when Clara, pale and hesitant, approached her. "He's back," she said quietly. "I saw him at the edge of town. He looks lost." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Back? After everything? He's got nowhere else to go," Clara said, her voice trembling. "His family sent him away. He's broken, Eleanor. I almost felt sorry for him." "Don't," Eleanor snapped, standing. "He doesn't deserve it." "Where is he now?" "Near the old mill, sitting by the river. People saw him and walked the other way." Eleanor grabbed her coat, her mind racing. This was her chance to see the damage up close, to twist the knife one last time. She found him exactly where Clara said, huddled on the riverbank, his knees drawn up, his face gaunt and unshaven. The man she'd loved was gone, replaced by this hollow shell, his hazel eyes dull and lifeless. He looked up as she approached, his shoulders slumping further. "Ellie," he croaked. "Why are you here? Haven't you done enough?" "Not yet," she said, crouching to his level, her voice soft but laced with ice. "I wanted to see you like this alone, unwanted. Your mother wrote to me, you know. She can't even stand the sight of you. And Lily, she hates you now. How does it feel, James, to lose them too?" He flinched, his hands clawing at the dirt. "You didn't have to bring them into this. They didn't do anything to you." "You did," she said, leaning closer. "You made me this way. Every lie, every night you spent with her, every promise you broke, it built this. And now you get to live with it." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything, please, just stop." She stood, looking down at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "There's nothing left to stop. You've got no one, James. No family, no friends, no home. You're a ghost now, and you'll stay that way. Every time you try to start over, someone will know. Someone will tell. That's my promise to you." He sobbed, his head dropping to his chest, but she didn't stay to watch. She turned and walked away, the sound of his cries fading into the rush of the river. Back at the cottage, she found Clara waiting, her eyes wide with questions she didn't dare ask. "He's finished," Eleanor said simply, sinking into a chair. "His family's done with him. He's got nothing left." Clara nodded slowly, then whispered, "What about us?" Eleanor glanced at her, at the swell of her belly, and felt a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or exhaustion. "We survive," she said. "That's all we do now." But deep down, she knew the truth. Survival wasn't enough. The fire she'd lit in James's life had warmed her for a moment, but it couldn't fill the void he'd left. She'd won. Yes, she'd broken him beyond repair, but the victory was hollow, a cold comfort in the endless night. The riverbank was quiet the next morning, the air heavy with mist rolling off the water. Eleanor returned to the spot where she'd left James, her boots crunching on the damp earth. She hadn't slept, her mind had been too alive, too consumed with the image of him crumpled and weeping, his world in ashes. She'd won, she told herself. She'd stripped him bare, taken everything he'd ever held dear. But it still wasn't enough. Not until she saw the light go out in his eyes, not until he broke so completely that he couldn't even recognize himself. He was still there, slumped against a tree, his clothes damp and clinging to his frame. He hadn't moved much since she'd left him, judging by the hollow look on his face, the way his hands hung limp at his sides. He didn't notice her at first, his gaze fixed on the river, unseeing, lost in whatever torment churned inside him. Perfect. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across him. "James," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, like a blade sliding under skin. He flinched, his head jerking up. His eyes were red-rimmed, sunken, the hazel dulled to a muddy gray. "Ellie," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Please. No more." She crouched beside him, close enough to smell the stale sweat and despair on him. "Oh, James," she said, her tone almost tender, a cruel mockery of the love they'd once shared. "You don't get to decide when it's over. You lost that right when you chose her over me." He shook his head weakly, his hands trembling. "I've got nothing left. You've taken it all, my boat, my family, my name. What more do you want?" "I want you to feel it," she said, leaning in until their faces were inches apart. "Every second of every day. I want you to wake up screaming, to see my face in every shadow, to hear my voice in every silence. You don't get to forget, James. You don't get to heal." He stared at her, his breath hitching, and she saw it then, a crack, a fracture in what little sanity he had left. She seized it, her words sharpening. "You think this is bad? It's just the beginning. I've got more letters ready, ones I haven't sent yet. Ones that tell your mother you laughed about her behind her back, that you called Lily a burden. Ones that say you planned to leave them long before I came along. They'll believe it, you know. They already doubt you. I'll make sure they hate you so much they'll spit on your grave." "No," he whimpered, his hands clawing at his hair. "That's not true, I never said that. I'd never." "They don't know that," she cut in, her voice rising with cold precision. "And they'll never ask. They'll see the words, they'll feel the betrayal, and you'll be dead to them. More than you already are. You'll be a monster in their eyes, James. A stranger they wish they'd never known." He rocked forward, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat, a sob, a scream, something broken and raw. "Stop," he begged, his voice cracking. "Please, Ellie, stop. I can't take it." But she didn't stop. She pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket, one she'd kept during their years together, filled with his words, his promises, his little confessions. She flipped it open, her fingers steady, as she found a page. "October 12, 2022, she read aloud. "Ellie, you're the only thing that keeps me sane. The sea's rough, but you're my calm, remember that. You wrote it after a storm, when you came home shivering, and I warmed you by the fire. You said I was your everything." He froze, his eyes widening as the memory hit him. She turned the page. "March 3, 2023. I died before I hurt you, Ellie. You're my heart. You wrote that the night you proposed we get married someday. No ring, just words, but I believed you." Her voice hardened. "And all that time, you were lying. You were with her, weren't you? Smiling at me while you stabbed me in the back." James shook his head frantically, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't. I loved you, Ellie. I swear." "Don't," she snapped, slamming the notebook shut. "Don't you dare say that. You didn't love me. You used me. And now I'm using you." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm going to send this notebook to your mother. Every sweet word you wrote, every lie you fed me, she'll see it all. She'll know how you played me, how you played them. And when she's done reading, she'll burn it herself, because she'll hate you too much to keep it." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing her wrist, his grip weak but desperate. "No, Ellie, please don't do that. I'll do anything. I'll leave, I'll disappear. Just don't." She yanked her arm free, standing over him, her shadow swallowing him whole. "You don't get to bargain. You don't get to beg. You're nothing, James. A ghost I made. And I'm not done haunting you." He collapsed back against the tree, his body shaking with sobs, his hands clawing at his face as if he could tear the pain out of himself. She watched, her heart cold, as he unraveled. His breathing grew ragged, his words dissolving into incoherent murmurs. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over, a mantra of despair. His eyes darted wildly, unfocused, as if he saw things she couldn't, memories, ghosts, the wreckage of his life closing in. Eleanor stepped back, satisfied. This was at the breaking point. She'd stripped him of his pride, his family, his sanity, and now she'd taken his mind. He was a shell, a man undone, trapped in a prison of his own guilt and her relentless vengeance. She turned to leave, but paused, glancing back one last time. "James," she said softly, almost kindly, "you'll hear me in your dreams. Every night. Forever." He didn't respond, just rocked back and forth, his hands pressed to his ears, his mouth moving soundlessly. She walked away, the mist swallowing her steps, leaving him to the river and the darkness inside him. Back at the cottage, Clara was waiting, her face pale. "Did you see him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor nodded, setting the notebook on the table. "He's gone," she said simply. "Not dead, but gone. He won't come back from this." Clara stared at her, a mix of fear and awe in her eyes. "What did you do?" "I finished it," Eleanor replied, her voice flat. He's not a man anymore. He's a shadow, and he'll stay that way. Clara didn't ask more, and Eleanor didn't offer. She sat by the window, watching the sea roll in the distance, the weight of her victory settling over her. It wasn't joy she felt, not anymore, just a quiet, empty triumph. She'd destroyed him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to break. And yet, as the days turned to weeks, she began to hear whispers of a man wandering the coast, muttering to himself, his eyes wild and lost. They said he spoke to someone who wasn't there, called her name in the night. Ellie, he'd whisper over and over, until the wind carried it away. She'd smile then, a small, bitter thing, knowing she'd won. James was alive, but he'd never be free. His mind was hers now, a battlefield she'd claimed, and she'd live in it forever just as she'd promised. Weeks passed in Harrow's Bay, the sea rolling in and out with its timeless rhythm, but the town was forever changed. The fire that consumed the Silver Gull had faded from the horizon, its charred remains hauled away by the tide, yet the memory lingered, a spark that ignited something far greater. Eleanor's letters, nailed to doors and mailed to distant ports, had done their work, but it was the whispers that truly took root, spreading like wildfire through the coastal villages, carried on the wind, and the tongues of travelers. James Carter's name became a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered over pints in taverns and murmured in church pews, a legend of ruin born from one woman's wrath. Eleanor stayed in her cottage, her days quiet, but her mind restless. She'd won. James was broken, his sanity shattered on that riverbank, but the victory sat heavy, a stone in her chest. Clara remained too, her belly growing rounder, her presence a constant reminder of the wreckage they'd both survived. They didn't speak much, bound by necessity more than friendship, but there was an understanding between them, a silent pact forged in the ashes of their shared betrayal. The first whispers came back to Harrow's Bay on a crisp April morning, carried by a fishmonger from Stoneport, a town 30 miles north. He'd stopped at the tavern, his cart creaking under the weight of his catch, and over a mug of ale, he told the story. "Saw a man up there last week," he said, his voice low, drawing the crowd closer. "Gaunt fella, wild-eyed, muttering to himself by the docks. Kept saying Ellie, Ellie, like he was calling a ghost. Folks said his name's James Carter, used to be a fisherman here, didn't he? They reckon he's cursed, lost his mind after his boat burned and his woman turned on him." Eleanor overheard it from the market, her basket of bread and cheese forgotten in her hands. She didn't smile, didn't react, just listened as the tale spun itself out, the fishmonger's words painting James as a specter haunting the coast. It was exactly what she'd wanted, wasn't it? His name tainted, his life reduced to a shadow play of madness. And yet, the satisfaction was fleeting, a flicker drowned by the dull ache that never left her. The rumors grew, twisting and branching as they traveled. In Cresthaven, a port town further up the coast, a barmaid claimed she'd served him a drink, only for him to spill it, trembling, when she asked his name. "He looked at me like I was gonna strike him," she told her patrons, then whispered something about a fire and a woman who wouldn't let him go. Left without a word, just staggered off into the night. By the time the story reached Dunmere, where his mother and sister still lived, it had morphed into something darker, a tale of a man driven mad by guilt, hunted by the spirit of a lover he'd wronged. Margaret Carter, they said, refused to hear his name, slamming her door on anyone who dared mention it. Lily, fragile and quiet, had taken to praying in the village church, her tears staining the pews as she begged forgiveness for a brother she no longer claimed. Eleanor received a second letter from Margaret a month later, the handwriting more unsteady than before. "Miss Mayhew, the stories have reached us. They say my James is a madman, wandering the coast, calling your name. I don't know if it's true, but I see him in my dreams, thin and broken, not the boy I raised. You've done what you set out to, haven't you? He's gone from us, from himself. I hope it brings you peace, because it's brought me none. I won't write again." She folded the letter and tucked it away, her fingers lingering on the creases. Peace. The word felt foreign, hollow. She'd wanted James to suffer, and he did more than she'd ever imagined, but the void inside her remained, untouched by his ruin. The rumors spread beyond the coast, carried inland by merchants and sailors, each retelling adding new layers. In a tavern in Blackridge, 100 miles away, a bard wove it into a song to the fisherman's fall. He called it, his voice lilting over the strings of his lute, a man of the sea with a heart so untrue, loved one, then two, till his soul came unglued. The fire took his ship, the woman his mind. Now he roams the shores, forever maligned. The crowd clapped, tossing coins, and the song took flight, sung in alehouses and marketplaces, embedding James's fate in the collective memory of strangers. Eleanor heard it one evening when a traveling peddler stopped in Harrow's Bay, his voice drifting through her open window. She stood frozen, the lyrics cutting deeper than she'd expected, a mirror held up to the monster she'd become. Clara noticed her stillness, glancing up from the shirt she was mending. "You've made him a legend," she said, her tone careful. "He'll never escape it now." "He wasn't supposed to," Eleanor replied, turning away from the window. "That was the point." But as the months wore on, the stories grew wilder, more distorted. In Portswell, they said he'd been seen clawing at the sand, screaming about a woman's voice in the waves. In Greyhaven, a dockworker swore he'd found James curled up in an alley, whispering to a shadow only he could see. "Ellie's here," he'd muttered, over and over, until the worker fled, convinced the man was possessed. The tales painted him as a figure of pity and terror, a wretch undone by love turned to vengeance, a warning to any man who dared stray. By summer, the rumors had circled back to Harrow's Bay, richer and stranger than when they'd left. Mrs. Harrow, ever the gossip, cornered Eleanor at the market one day, her eyes gleaming with morbid curiosity. "They say he's in Lorne now, up north," she said. "Folks found him by the cliffs, talking to the air. Said he tried to jump, but something held him back, like he was afraid of what waited below. They're calling him the Mad Fisherman, you know. Some think you cursed him, Eleanor. Did you?" Eleanor met her gaze, unflinching. "He cursed himself," she said, and walked away, the weight of the words settling like dust. That night, she dreamed of him, James, gaunt and trembling, standing on a cliff's edge, his eyes locked on hers. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice breaking, "why won't you let me go?" She woke with a start, her chest tight, his face lingering in the dark. It was the first time she'd doubted, the first time she wondered if she'd gone too far. But the doubt passed, buried beneath the cold resolve that had carried her this long. The final piece came in August, when a sailor from Lorne docked in Harrow's Bay, his face grim as he shared the news. "He's dead," he said, his voice cutting through the tavern's hum. "James Carter, the Mad Fisherman, found him at the bottom of a cliff, washed up on the rocks. No one knows if he jumped or fell, but he was smiling, they said, like he'd finally found peace." The room fell silent, eyes darting to Eleanor, who stood at the bar, her hands steady around a glass of water. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just listened as the sailor went on. "They buried him in a pauper's grave. No family came. No one claimed him. But the stories won't stop. People say he still walks the coast, calling her name." Clara, beside her, gasped softly, but Eleanor only nodded, setting the glass down. "Good," she said, her voice low enough that only Clara heard. "Let him call." She left the tavern, the night air cool against her skin, and walked to the cliff where it had all begun. The sea roared below, endless and indifferent, and she stood there, staring into the dark. James was gone, truly gone, but his ruin lived on, etched into the world by her hand. The rumors would spread further, grow larger, until he was nothing but a myth, a shadow of a man destroyed by a woman he'd underestimated. And yet, as she turned back to the cottage, a whisper lingered in her mind, not his voice, but her own. "What have I become?" She pushed it down, locked it away, and kept walking. The sea swallowed her footsteps, and the night closed in, carrying the tale of James Carter, the Mad Fisherman, into eternity.